Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to Deku with the Demigod Part 6. Last time on the What If, the villain hideout raid took place, with Suzuku, Kirishima, Todoroki, and Momo trying to help, with them getting to the base by following a tracker that Momo created. And when a conflict took place, they were able to help by subduing some League of Villains members, and bringing Bakugo away from the villains. Then afterwards, Class 1A moved into dorms, with them after a week starting to create ultimate moves for the upcoming provisional license exams. Then after a week, the exams took place, with everyone except Ayama being able to get through the first phase of the exams. Then afterwards, the second one took place, with it just ending. So now that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so to begin this what if around half an hour after the last part ended, and during that time when the exams concluded, the students were told to get dressed back into their school uniforms. And during this time, Izuku was able to recover enough from the energy usage he did during the exams, and he was able to recover enough energy to get back to somewhat normalcy. And when Izuku was dressed, he went back to the arena, and when he got back, he saw that in the middle there was a giant screen, with the main examiner in front of it on a giant podium. And when the main examiner saw that everyone was present, he showed the names of the people that passed on the board, with Izuku seeing that he passed. However, like in the canon, Todoroki and Anasa failed because of how they fought during the test, and Bakugo failed because he was rude to the people he was supposed to be saving. But when the main examiner showed the names, he told the group that whoever failed the exams this time shouldn't worry, because they still have hope, because they will be able to take the exams again, but it will be after a whole set of extra classes. Then once he said that, the students that passed the exams were taken to get their pictures taken, and get their licenses. Okay, so now we skip to when Class 1A was able to get back to the dorms that night, with everyone being able to go to sleep that night. Because in this, Bakugo doesn't start his fight with Suzuku, because of a mixture of reasons. Because yes, he does feel responsible for what happened to All Might during his fight with All For One, but because Suzuku doesn't have One For All, and already had a quirk, and he was not so-called singled out by the person he admired most, Bakugo does not start the fight. Okay, so now we skip to the first day of the school year, and during the assembly they learned about the hero work studies, but because they glossed over it, they didn't actually understand what it was. So the class asked Aizawa what it was, but no matter how many times they asked this question, they wouldn't get an actual answer. Okay, so now we skip to the next day. And when the school bell rang, 3 upperclassmen walked into Class 1A. And when they walked in, they tried their best and failed at introducing themselves and explaining the hero work studies. But after failing a couple times, the blonde-haired one told everyone to get dressed in their PE clothes and meet him in Gym Gamma and get ready to fight him, because that would be the best way for him to explain why it was important. Then after a couple minutes, Class 1A was able to get ready in the gym, and when Miro believed that everyone was ready, the match began. And the second it did, his clothes hit the ground, with him phasing right through him. And once the clothes hit the ground, Miro was gone, with Miro falling into the ground. And seeing this, everyone put up their guard, trying to predict where he would appear. But after a couple seconds, Miro jumped out from the ground in front of Jiro, and before she was able to react, Miro was able to hit Jiro in the gut, making her fall to the ground. And once Miro hit Jiro, he began to go after the long-range fighters. And seeing this, the melee fighters tried to run towards him, but by the time all of them got to him, he was able to take out all the long-range fighters and a decent portion of the mid-range. And seeing this, the class threw all they had at him, but no matter what the attacks were, it just went straight through him. And with that, after a bit of time, most of the class was on the ground, with there being only Izuku and Bakugo remaining. And seeing this, Bakugo fired an explosion, and he launched himself towards Mirio. And while he did that, Izuku used the air to push him to go in for a punch. But surprising the both of them, Mirio was able to go through both attacks. And before Izuku collided with Bakugo, he took a step back, with him landing a couple feet away. But when Izuku stepped back, Mirio returned back to normal, and he was able to grab one of the legs of Bakugo, who was still flying. And seeing this, Bakugo tried to fire another attack. But while he was open, Mirio phased through the attack, and he punched Bakugo in the gut, making him finally fall to the ground, leaving it so only Izuku was remaining. And seeing this, Izuku shot out a wave of air to try to slow down Mirio. But seeing this, Mirio sunk into the ground. And before Izuku was able to react, Mirio appeared in front of him, and he wound up for a punch. And seeing this, Izuku channeled electricity into his hand, and he tried to hit the fist to at least slow it down. But when the fist hit, Mirio's fist went right through Izuku's. And with Izuku being open, Mirio using the other hand punched Izuku in the gut, making him fall to the ground. And when Izuku hit the ground, because all of Class 1A was out, the match was over, with the winner being Mirio. And once everyone got back to their feet, Mirio gave a speech, telling them that his quirk used to be weak, and how he used to be dead last, and how he was dead last until he began to train like hell in order to catch up. And he ended the speech by telling them that's why he believes that the hero work studies are important, because it's a way to turn experience into power. And shortly after the speech, Class 1A goes back to their classes while the big three go back to their dorms. And while the three were walking, Nejire asked Mirio if anyone had caught his eye during his time with Class 1A. And after thinking for some time, he thought that Izuku could be useful as Sir. Okay, so now we skip around a week, and currently Izuku was having lunch with Ochako. But while they were eating, Izuku on the speakers was told to go to the teacher's lounge. And when he got there, waiting for him was All Might and Mirio sitting next to each other on a couch. And when Izuku sat across from them on a separate couch, the two told Izuku that he was given an offer for the hero work studies, who was given to him by Sir Night-Eye. And when they told him about it, Izuku accepted. Okay, so now we skip to the next free day Izuku had, and currently him and Mirio were standing outside of Sir Night-Eye's office, and when Izuku walked in, he was told about the Shia Hazaikai. Because in this, he doesn't have to do his test with Sir, because he was actually given an offer. And after Izuku was told about the group, he and Mirio were sent on patrol around the area, so Izuku could get used to it. And while the two were walking, the two talked, with them getting to know more about each other. And with that, Izuku was able to learn that Mirio was actually holding back on him and his classmates, because in reality, Mirio has a second quirk, with it being somewhat similar to All Might's, because it's a power booster quirk. And Izuku tells Mirio about his knuckles, and how they were a gift from his dad. And after around half an hour of walking, the two start to walk in front of an alleyway. But before they could walk past it, a little girl started to run out of the darkness, and she collided into Izuku, with her knocking him off his feet. And when Izuku looked up, he and Mirio looked into the alley to see what the girl was running from. And after a couple seconds, they see someone start to walk out of the darkness. And when the two were actually able to get a good look, they were able to see that it was Overhaul, the guy that Sir just told Izuku about. And when the two recognized the man, Overhaul told the girl that was named Yuri that she was disturbing the heroes, and that she should really hurry back to his side. But for the whole time Overhaul was talking, Izuku wasn't paying attention to him. Instead, he was focusing on the girl, and how her arms were completely wrapped up in bandages, and she was visibly trembling in his arms. So seeing this, Izuku focusing on that, he was about to shoot himself at Overhaul and punch him with his knuckles. So Izuku began to say the word fight. But before he was able to finish, Mirio quickly pulled on Izuku's arms, pulling him back, and he told Izuku that they really should be returning to their patrol. But Izuku still wasn't completely there. So seeing this, Overhaul told the two that he would explain everything that was going on if they just followed him. And after he said this, he turned and he began to walk deeper into the alley. And Yuri began to run back when she saw that Overhaul was beginning to take off one of his gloves. And seeing that the two were gone after a couple seconds, the two decided to go back onto their patrol, with them returning back to Sir's office after an hour or two. And when they returned, they told Sir about what happened during the patrol. And when they told him, Sir got mad at Izuku and he began to lecture him, telling him that he could have ruined the whole operation if he had gone through with it, and that he can't do whatever he wants because he's not as strong as All Might. And shortly after Night-Eye was done lecturing Izuku went back to UA. So now we skip a couple days, and once Izuku was ready, he began to leave to go to Sir's agency. And while he was leaving, Su, Ochako, and Kirishima were leaving to go to their work studies as well. And seeing this, the group decided to go together until they need to split up. But after around half an hour, the group ends up at Sir Night-Eye's agency. And when the group walks in, they see multiple pro heroes and agencies, with some of them being Fatgum and his agency, Ryuku and her agency, Rocklock, some old guy Izuku recognized from the All Might fight against All For One, and their teacher Aizawa. And after a couple minutes of the pros talking to each other, Sir decided that everyone that wanted to show up had. And when everyone was seated, the meeting began. And during the meeting, pro heroes began to discuss everything they knew about the Shia Zaikai. And eventually, they came to the conclusion that the group was using Yuri's blood for anti-quirk bullets. Then once the meeting was over, the students were sent to another room so the pros could talk more about classified information with each other. But after a couple minutes, Aizawa walked out of the room and he walked over to the group of students. And he told them that originally he wanted them off the mission from here on out because recent information concludes that the League of Villains are involved in some way, and he doesn't want them near them. But because of what he's seen, he knows that the students will go even if he tells them no. So he tells them to not be stupid and to play it safe. Okay, so now we skip a couple days, and during that time, Sir spent his time trying to find more information about the Shia Zaikai, with him eventually being able to locate the area that he believes that Eri is being kept. And once he got this information, he called everyone who was at the meeting back to his office, and he told them where it was, and he told them that they will be going the next morning. Okay, so now we skip to the next morning when it was around 8:30, and when the raid began, a police officer knocked on the front door, and they shouted that they have a warrant. But right after they said this, a giant villain burst through the wall and he flung some police officers. So Ryuku's agency went to fight the villain, while Sir Night-Eye's agency, Fatgum's agency, and a small group of police officers and other heroes ran deeper into the base. And when they got into the actual base, more villains began to attack them. So in the process, in order to allow the group to continue on, Bubble Girl and Centipede stayed behind in the top floor, and they began to fight the villains that were appearing. And when the remaining group got down a flight of stairs, they found themselves in a long hallway. And after a couple minutes of running, they get to a wall. So Mirio used his quirk to dash at the wall, and he phased his head through the wall. And just like he suspected, it was there to just block their path. So hearing this, Izuku and Kirishima ran at the wall, and when they got to it, they both punched it as hard as they could, with them creating a big enough hole for the group to go through. So the group continued to run. Then after a couple more minutes, the group comes across another wall, and seeing this, Mirio increased his strength and he ran straight through it. And he saw that it wasn't an actual wall again. But even with that, he decided to keep on going to get the area as quickly as he could, because he felt like it was taking too long. And the group, seeing that Mirio just disappeared, they ran even faster to get to him as fast as they could. But before they were able to get to the wall, the floor opened up under them, creating a giant hole. fall, with everyone in the group falling through. And after a couple seconds of falling, the group lands in the room, and waiting for them in that room were 3 villains, which wanted to fight. But before it could escalate too much, a racer hit one of the villains in the head, and Tamaki shouted that he had the villains covered, and that the rest of the group could continue on. And seeing this, Facom told them to continue on, and even though some of them were reluctant, they kept on going. But after a couple minutes of running, Mimic decided to attack Aizawa, so he launched a pillar at him that would have crushed him. But before the pillar could hit, Kirishima and Facom pushed Aizawa out of the way, and in exchange, they got hit instead, and they got flung into a different room, splitting them up from the rest of the group. And seeing this, the group spent some time trying to figure out a way to get them back. But after a minute of this, they came to the conclusion that they would just be wasting time spending any more. So they kept on going, but after a couple minutes, Mimic decided to mess with the group again. So he began to use his quirk to twist and contort the hallway the group was in. But seeing this, Rocklock used his quirk to make the hallway stay in place. And the moment Rocklock did this, Mimic began to shoot out walls, making the group split up into different rooms. And when the walls were placed, Izuku and Aizawa were trapped with each other. And seeing the new walls, Izuku began to launch a barrage of punches with his knuckles, until he eventually was able to burst through the wall, making a hole big enough for the two. And with that, the two went into the next room. And when the two walked into the room, they saw 2 Rocklocks, with one on top of the other one. But the one on the bottom had a stab wound and was bleeding out. But luckily, Aizawa was able to see through this, so he used his quirk on the top Rocklock. And with that, her face began to melt, revealing it to be Toga. And once she was revealed, the 3 began to fight. But after a bit of time, she was able to stab Aizawa in the shoulder, which was only deep enough to draw blood. And before she was able to get hit by Izuku, she ran out of the room and into the room Izuku and Aizawa came from. And seeing this, Izuku followed after her, using the air to push him. But when Izuku followed her into the next room, Toga was gone. And because there were other things Izuku needed to worry about, he decided to just let Toga go, and focus on saving his teammates. So he began to break down the other walls. So after some time, the remaining group was able to come together. And shortly after the group was able to come together, they began to run through the hallway again. But after a couple minutes, Mimic appeared again, and he began to sink the ground under the group. And when he began to do this, to the group's surprise, Toga and Twice began to rile up Mimic as if they were trying to do it on purpose. And after a couple seconds, Izuku was able to pinpoint where Mimic was, based on his constant shouting, which was somewhere in the ceiling. So once Izuku was able to find it, he used the air to push himself up, launching him at high speeds. And while he was flying, Izuku covered himself in electricity, and he pulled back his arm. And when he got to the ceiling, he punched it as hard as he could. And when he made contact, a chunk of the ceiling broke apart. And with that, a part of Mimic was revealed. And with that, Aizawa was able to cancel out Mimic's quirk. And when his quirk got deactivated, he appeared out of the ceiling. And when he was out, Izuku made contact with him. And with him covered in electricity, Mimic began to get shocked, with him starting to get tense muscles and spasming. And to make it even worse, Night Eye threw his high-density seals at Mimic, which knocked him out. And with his air manipulation, Izuku slowed down both himself and Mimic's ascent. And shortly after the two got back to the ground, the group tied up Mimic. And when that was done, Izuku, Aizawa, and Sir Night Eye began to run farther down the hallway, while the rest stayed by Mimic. Then after a couple minutes of running, the 3 get to a dead end. So seeing this, Izuku increased his speed with air manipulation, and he punched through the wall, with him being able to create a big enough hole for the 3 to get through. And when the 3 look around, they find themselves in a giant room, with Mirio and an already fused Overhaul fighting, while Iri was a couple feet away, wrapped in a torn Mirio cape. And seeing this, Sir told Izuku to help Mirio, while he and Aizawa focused on getting Iri to safety. And hearing this, Izuku nodded, and he began to run. And when he got to the 2, Mirio was fighting around Overhaul, with him being able to get shots off by phasing through a mixture of the terrain and Overhaul himself. And seeing this, Izuku began to focus, and he began to make a tornado around himself. And with that, Overhaul began to lose his footing. And seeing this, Overhaul tried to put his hands to the ground to send a pillar at Izuku. But before he was able to make contact, Mirio came out of the ground, and he was able to move his hands away, and in the process get another punch in. Then he disappeared back into the ground. And this kept going on, with Izuku being able to make Overhaul even weaker, while Mirio attacked. But after a couple seconds, Overhaul was so distracted that Izuku was able to get too close to him. And while he was distracted, Izuku grabbed onto Overhaul's back, and he infused as much electricity as possible into him. And even after a couple seconds, Overhaul began to smoke, and it was as if he was struck by lightning. And with that, Overhaul's body began to spasm, and he got incredibly dizzy and nauseated. Then Izuku immediately backed away so he wouldn't get hit by one of his hands. And with Overhaul on the brink of passing out, Mirio was able to land one final punch to his face, and when he made contact, Overhaul passed out, with his muscles tensing up from the electricity. And once the two were sure that Overhaul was knocked out, Izuku ran out of the room as fast as he could, using the air to push him back to the group he was with before. And when he got to them, he told them that Overhaul had been defeated. And shortly afterward, the group put anti-quirk cuffs on Overhaul. And because Night Eye wasn't really in the fight, he is still alive. And the mission was considered not a failure because less damage had occurred around the area, and it was all mostly contained in the actual base. Okay, so now we skip a couple hours, and all the people that were injured were taken to the hospital. And on the way to the police station, the same things happened, so Overhaul got his hands cut off by Shigaraki, and he currently has some anti-quirk bullets. Okay, so now we skip about a week. And when class started, Aizawa announced that Class 1A will have to come up with an idea for what they want to do for the school festival. And eventually, they came to the decision of doing a dance. Then after school, Izuku and Miura decided to visit Yuri, so they went to the hospital. And the reason she's still in the hospital is because Overhaul is their only known relative, and they didn't trust her to put her in a normal orphanage, because her quirk is so strong and unstable. But after the two started to talk with her, they were able to easily tell that she was still sad about what happened to her. So the two began to think of a way to cheer her up, with them eventually coming to the idea that she should come to the school festival. And once they decided that, they ran to Aizawa and they asked him if they were allowed to bring her. And they were able to get the green light, but on the condition that someone would stay by her side the whole time. Then shortly after they got the confirmation, the two students went back to UA to get ready for the festival. Okay, so now it's time for me to explain what Izuku's doing for the dance. And basically, it would be around the same as in the canon. So during the first part, he would dance. Then during the second part, he would be in the rafters holding a Bayama by a rope, while he shoots out naval lasers. But in this, Izuku would be using their manipulation to make the lasers dance around as well. But while they were practicing that week, they messed up the rope they were using to hold the Bayama, with them noticing that the day before the dance. So Izuku agreed to go to the store in the morning and get the replacement before the dance would begin. Okay, so now we skip to the next day, and Izuku just left the store with the rope. And when he was about to run back to the school, he bumps into an older gentleman and a young lady. He then apologizes, but before he could start to walk back to the school, he recognizes the faces of the two as La Brava and Gentle Criminal. And once they were able to figure out that Izuku was able to see through their disguises, they took them off. And once Izuku saw this, he leapt at Gentle using the air to push him. But when he tried to, the air in front of him turned into a trampoline, which made Izuku get flung back to where he began. And when Izuku was on the ground, Gentle created a trampoline under himself and La Brava, and the two began to bounce away, with them heading towards UA. And seeing this, Izuku followed after them, with him leaving the rope at the store, and he used the air to push him, with him being able to almost catch up to the two after about a minute. And when Izuku was close enough, he manipulated the air around him, and he created a strong air blast, and he shot it at the two while they were in midair. And with Gentle not expecting it, he got hit in the back. And with him being distracted, he failed to make a trampoline under himself and La Brava, which made the two begin to fall, with them crashing into a construction site. And seeing this, Izuku ran to the site, and by the time Izuku got to the site, Gentle was back onto his feet, and he was standing on a steel beam above Izuku, and he began to make all the beams in the area springy. But in the process, the screws that held the beams together began to get undone, with the beam getting so undone that it came out of place and it began to fall. And when Izuku saw this, he looked under to see what it would land on. And when he looked, he saw that there was a pedestrian, and that he would have gotten hit if there was nothing to stop the beam. So Izuku ran under the beam as fast as he could, and when he was under it, he prepared to catch it, with him making an air current that went straight above him, so it at least slowed down the beam's descent by something. And when Izuku caught it, he was stuck holding it. And while Izuku was stuck, Gentle used his quirk on a nearby crane, and he used that to fling both him and La Brava towards UA. But after a couple seconds of Izuku holding the beam, he was able to put it down. And when he put it down, he began to figure out a way to catch up to the two. And that's when he figured out that the crane was still springy. And with that, he came to the conclusion that it must take some time before Gentle's quirk gets deactivated. So Izuku looked around and he picked up a couple loose screws that came from the fallen beam, and he put them into his pockets. Then he began to pull on the crane until it was stretched to its limits. And while he was doing that, he was focusing on the air around him, holding it back as if it was a dam. And once he was ready, he let go of the crane, and at the same time, he let the air flow, pushing him in a giant burst. And with that, Izuku began to fly towards the two villains at double the speed. So after around 20 seconds, Izuku was around 30 feet away. So when Izuku was that far away, he pulled out a screw that he picked up, and he began to channel electricity into it. And when it was electrified, Izuku threw it at Gentle, but because he was ready for Izuku this time, he created a trampoline that made the screw bounce back, which allowed Izuku to grab it again. Then by the time it came back, the three were close to hitting the ground. So Gentle created a trampoline under himself and La Brava, which they used to soften their impact, while Izuku just landed on the ground doing a roll. And when the two groups landed, they began to fight, with Izuku throwing the screws at Gentle while Gentle made trampolines to make the screws bounce back. But after a couple throws, Izuku threw a screw at one of the trampolines that Gentle created, which made it bounce from trampoline to trampoline until it hit Gentle. And with it being electrified, Gentle got stung and burned from the screw. And with that, Gentle was distracted for a bit of time. And while Gentle was in pain, Izuku jumped at Gentle and La Brava, and he was able to pin the two to the ground. And when he pinned them, he began to cover himself with a small bit of electricity, which hit the two, because he wanted to make sure that they were stung enough that it would be hard for them to move, but he didn't want to put so much electricity that it would actually hurt them. And when he had them pinned, he began to think about what he should do next. But while he was in mid-thought, La Brava, using all of her energy, used her quirk on Gentle. And with that, Gentle's strength and stamina increased. And with that, he was able to push Izuku off of him and La Brava. And once Izuku was off of him, Gentle jumped to his feet, while La Brava was stuck on the ground with her being too tired to move. So the two began to fight, with Gentle now using trampolines to hit Izuku, because he knew that if he made contact with Izuku again, it would be game over. But after a minute of this, Izuku, after getting hit with another gently sandwich, Izuku began to focus on the air around him, with it beginning to speed up, and eventually after around 15 seconds creating a tornado, which was strong strong enough to pick Gentle up and began to fly around, while La Brava was able to grab onto a tree branch, allowing her to not go completely flying. Then while Gentle was being thrown, with him hitting trees and rocks, he was eventually able to grab onto a tree. And seeing this, Izuku began to focus more, with him trying to feel the electrons in the air. And after around 10 seconds, he felt an intense pain in the gut, as if he was hit by a cannonball. And once he felt that, a lightning bolt hit the tree that Gentle was holding onto. And when Izuku saw that Gentle got hit, he slowed down the tornado as fast as he could, with it completely disappearing after around 20 seconds. And with that, Gentle and La Brava fell to the ground, with Gentle being heavily burned and seizing up from the electricity in his system. And La Brava stumbled over the Gentle, and she shouted for Izuku to let him go. But before Izuku could say anything, Hounddog and Ectoplasm appeared, and they told Izuku that they were coming to see what was happening because they saw the lightning strike in the giant tornado. And when they appeared, Izuku immediately explained the situation to them. Then once Izuku was done telling them the story, Ectoplasm told Izuku that his class's dance would be in around 12 minutes, and that he should really hurry back to the school. And being told this, Izuku realized that he left the rope at the store where the fight began, so he began to run back as fast as he could. And once he got the rope, he ran back to UA, and Izuku was able to get to the school before the performance began. And while the dance was happening, there was no problems, so by the end of the dance, Eri smiled. And while this was going on, Gentle and La Brava were sent to jail, because Gentle wasn't able to take the entire blame, so La Brava went with him. And everything from here on out will be the exact same as in the canon, with Endeavor trying to become the new #1 hero. And that's where I'm going to leave the What If. I hope you enjoyed this whole series. It's been a lot of fun making this, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope to see you next time on Something Z.